Get this started here. We
Cool.
are glad to have Guy Combs again as our speaker and demo for our SKB's, what you call them again? Zoom and shares, as they call it. Welcome again. I've seen some familiar faces. Guy's been with SKB for at least 10 years.
Yeah, a little bit less than that. Andrew's been with you
Oh
guys.
yeah, we're not
right
talking
from
about
the
Andrew's
start,
an old timer. I mean, but you're, I think about 10, 9.
Yeah, time flies.
Yeah. So I think you're one of your first years there. I was my first year, so I think that's.
Oh right, okay.
So,
Yeah, I wasn't there for the Denver ones, but
no.
I came to Du Bois just after it started there.
The other old timer on the screen is Mr. Stephen Left, who's going to be monitoring while I go resume my vacation, but he's been to most of them or all of the SKB's workshops. So, Guy, thank you again for doing your class. Again, most people will be muted as we go along. If you want to talk, interrupt Guy, please, because he will just keep on talking, and he likes to talk to people, so he's good at it. You know, press to unmute yourself and give him a question. He'll be happy to do it. Enjoy your talk, Guy. I'm going to spotlight you and transfer the host to Stephen. All right. Have a good day.
Okay.
Take care, guys.
Yeah, I've got a big thing on my screen saying this meeting is being recorded and it won't go away.
Just click OK.
It doesn't say, got it. There we go. All right, we're good.
There we go. You're ready to go.
Okay, well, thanks everyone. It's lovely to have lots of people to come and see what I'm doing in the studio, and pretty much that's mostly what I will be doing today, is just kind of letting you guys have a look around the studio and what I'm working on. I will probably start mixing a palette, but this is not a start to finish kind of run through of my entire technique. I'll talk about it a bit, but it won't be the full kind of detailed instructional run through. And most of my paintings right now are kind of in the middle stage between underpainting and final rendering. So I won't be, we won't cover is transferring an image to a canvas or doing the actual underpainting. You can probably see that on there is one instructional video that I did for the Zoom and Share last year that I think is still up. And if you aren't able to look at that, I will be giving a mega Zoom instructional class during the actual workshop in September. And the scheduling of that will go out quite soon, I think. So yeah, so I'm gonna try and turn my screen around so you can see my easel. And so right now, what I'm working on, I've got 3 paintings up on the easel right now. This is the one that I'll be working on next. It's just a very simple line and lioness in the Marseille Mara, and you can see I've rendered the background. So all of this around the lions is basically how it's going to be when I finish the painting. So all I'm going to be painting in is the foreground and the lions, and the same pretty much with this one. So javelina. So you can see how I've done all of the backgrounds here. I've done a bit of glazing over the background there to kind of push it back as well. And I've painted some of the detail and some of the detail of the javelina. And you can see from this line here, this is all underpainting and the foreground here. And this one, I don't know if I can zoom in on it. It's not letting me do that. Hold on. Hold on. Of course, it did this when I was doing it with Anthony, and now it's not doing it. Never mind. So with this painting, you can see that I've got this crazy background thing going on. And if you guys have been following a lot of the work I've been doing recently, I have been experimenting with some of this sort of non-objective, abstract kind of background stuff. It's definitely a treatment that has a slight amount of like, it is representational of something. But in this case, I wanted to kind of give a sense of like the movement of the hummingbird that's been buzzing around and he's just come and landed on a branch. And also the scale of this painting, I wanted to do it like supersize because that kind of, it gives a sense of like the character and personality of the bird. And I'll be doing this for my show next, which will be next year in Arizona, called Niche. And the show is basically, the theme of the show is around convergent evolution. And so the Sonoran Desert region and East Africa are two places that I'm very familiar with. And I'm becoming more familiar with the wildlife around here, and I'm already familiar with African wildlife. So when I moved here, I realized that there are a lot of species like hummingbirds that have very striking similarities with the wildlife that you see in Kenya. And so a comparison to the hummingbird would be a sunbird, which is also quite a small bird, has this absolutely stunning plumage. There are lots of different species of hummingbird, like of sunbird, as there are with hummingbirds in different areas. Their plumage is really striking. Their behavior is very similar. They're very territorial and they have this like big personality. And so I'll be doing another supersized painting of a sunbird to go next to this one. And the whole show will be images of species that have striking similarities from both those two places. So down here, so these are two that I'm working on as well. So serval cat and an ocelot. So an ocelot, obviously, you know, indigenous to most of South and Central America, and serval cat, you know, indigenous to most of Sub-Saharan and Southern Africa. Just very striking similarities, really. And so, you know, I'm not being too kind of specific and scientific about it. I just want to show people that come to the show, you know, how interesting it is that you know, these two continents that split apart 180 million years ago have just these incredibly striking similarities. And you know, and now in this day and age, you know, I've moved here. I'm a transplant into an environment that's very similar to East Africa, and I just wanted to kind of theme it around how wildlife has adapted in both of those places. So anyway, so there'll be leopards, there'll be jaguars, there'll be red-tailed hawks, there'll be auger buzzards, and even down to you know, plants as well. So we have the giant candelabra euphorbia in Kenya, and that's also a plant that's very, very similar to a cactus, which are indigenous, obviously, to the Americas and the Sonoran Desert. And so I'll be doing paintings of very strikingly similar images of those two places. So there'll be landscapes as well. And one of the most striking examples of convergent evolution is, and one that's always quoted to people, is the western meadowlark and the yellow-throated longclaw. So this is a yellow-throated longclaw. This is obviously just an underpainting of it at this point. And I'll do another one of a western meadowlark. But the yellow-throated longclaw has that very striking yellow chest, very similar markings around the throat. The only real difference between the two birds is that the long claw has these very, very long claws, which obviously are an evolutionary adaptation for helping them to get bugs out of bark and stuff like that. But yeah, but this is one that's always quoted, so that you have these two birds that are completely unrelated taxonomically, that occupy, these environments that are so far apart and have been, far apart for millions of years. But they look almost exactly the same. And the reason why is because some of these, the markings that they have are adaptations to their specific environment. So, these black markings around here, it's all specific to where the birds live, which is really interesting. And then this one here is a pearl-spotted owlet, which is indigenous to a lot of sub-Saharan Africa. We definitely have quite a few of them in Kenya. And I showed my reference photograph to a raptor expert from Arizona, and he was like, "Oh, there's a northern pygmy owl," and I said, "No, it's not." So again, you have two different species that have been separated for 180 million years, but look almost identical, and are classified in a different way on their taxonomic family tree. Which I just find that really, really fascinating. And so my whole show is themed around it. Yes. So to go back to the hummingbird. So with these backgrounds, to get this effect of the kind of splatter, I've used rubber cement. And when I first started doing it, what I didn't realize is that rubber cement does not react very favorably with oil paint. And so one of my first experiments was a complete failure, because I got this wonderful pattern, and then I did a glaze of oil over the top of it, and it for some reason it stops the oil paint from drying. So yeah, it's pointless doing it because you can't put any glazes over it. You can't put any washes over it or anything. So then I had to kind of think, how do I adapt to that situation? And for the first time since I was at art college, I picked up acrylics, which everyone laughed about, because I was always the oil painter and Andrew was always the acrylic painter, and now I'm using acrylic paints and he's using oils because he started using those for doing some glazing over his acrylic painting. So it's really interesting how that kind of symbiosis has developed with us sharing studio for 10 years. And that's probably one of the most obvious ways. So what I've done is basically, I've done a base color in acrylic. I've splattered it with rubber cement. And I did this kind of, it's very organic. Basically, you have a bottle of rubber cement. There's no real way to kind of aim it where you want to aim it. It just kind of happens the way it happens. So it has that wonderful kind of spontaneity about it. And so I do that, wait for it to dry, and then I do another base coat of acrylic. And you can maybe see down the bottom here, I've got some drips kind of coming down, and that's just from where I've applied a lot of water and the paint has just kind of dripped down. So you have this wonderful kind of swirling rubber cement pattern, and then you have this nice kind of drip pattern from the acrylics. It's just a really nice way to create interest in the background, which when you're done with it, and so basically once you've removed all of the rubber cement, you just rub it off, and any other kind of masking that you've done. I always do probably 4 or 5 coats of acrylic medium before I put any oil paint onto it. So before I put the oil paint on, it's a completely sealed surface. And then once that's done, then I can start doing some oil glazing. So you can see how some of these nice sort of grades of shading has happened here. And that's pretty much with oil paint. And then the bird itself, I'll render completely in oils, because oils have that wonderful quality of saturated color. And that's actually something I'm kind of struggling with at the moment. So you can see this part here, I basically painted from the palette straight away. I didn't put any undercoat and then glaze over it. I just used quinacridone magenta, and then I started like basically putting in the filaments with some of that mixed with white. And the problem with that is when you mix titanium white with any like bright saturated color, it just makes it chalky. And that's really not what you want to have when you're trying to achieve like iridescence on plumage of a hummingbird. So I went ahead and just kind of painted all of it. And then I decided for this bottom part, I would try a different tactic. So with this, I've basically, with titanium white, I've painted all of the filaments in white and then waited for that to dry. And then I've worked on this section basically with glazing. So the white of the titanium shines through the glazing and you get a much more kind of saturated color happening. And so I'll do that with the rest of it, and I'll probably go back and redo this whole section at the top here. And then the rest of the bird is a lot more kind of muted and subtle in terms of, you know, the color and the saturation. So I'll just paint that in the usual way that I paint, and then paint the branch. But it kind of gives you an idea of like a process that I'm going through with this painting. But yeah, I mean, these two here are definitely much more in line with, you know, my paintings that I've done, most of the paintings I've done for the last kind of 15 years, where, you know, my backgrounds are representational, but quite a lot looser than the foregrounds, and quite a lot more kind of blurred. I want to, you know, get that sort of sense of the subject matter popping out. And then there's a number of ways you can do that. And one of those is to have less detail in the background and to blur the edges. And a lot of people say, that looks like a photograph. Well, it does look like a photograph, but it's also what your eyes do when they focus in on something. You know, obviously when you're focusing in on, you can't see what's happening around it, but what is happening around it is that there's less focus happening because, you know, you're pinpointed on one particular subject. So yeah, I mean, you know, it can look like a photograph. When people say that, it doesn't, you know, I take it as a compliment, really. And yeah, and you know, this very much is a technique that I picked up from my dad. If you look at a lot of his paintings, he did that whole kind of foreshortening thing where, you know, the landscape was kind of blurred out in order for the subject matter to really kind of have some focus. And so in order to achieve that, I don't have the palette obviously mixed that I had when I did this background, but I've used a combination of a sort of like very kind of greenish mauves, some green that's mixed with a lot of raw umber. Raw umber is a great color to use to tone down background colors with natural subjects because it has a lot of green tint to it. And so a lot of raw umber mixed with mauves, and then the lighter colors are more kind of yellow ochre mixed with like Prussian blue to achieve like a more kind of earthy natural green. And then so I just basically, you know, very roughly paint in strokes with a narrow hog's hair, so there's no kind of like detail. And then once that's all done, I get a fantail brush like this, and I just kind of blur all of that out with a fantail brush, and then you get this wonderful sort of out of focus kind of feel to it, which really, when you start to paint the subject matter, it really kind of pops out. So you can see how like the difference between that kind of background and then, you know, painting in the detail grass, how you can get that sort of sense of foreshortening, which I use in a lot of my paintings. So yeah, so I'm probably gonna just have time to show you. I should probably talk about. Let me just look at the view. I should talk a little bit about my underpainting and transferring an image to a canvas. So a lot of people, if you've seen my instructional videos before, will see that on the white canvas, when I do image transfer, I use a grid technique, but rather than drawing lines, I put dots on where the lines would intersect. So you're not distracted by a grid per se, you just have these little dots as kind of guidelines. And I use that to draw out the shape of my animal or whatever subject matter I'm doing. And then once I've drawn it in, I get some fixative spray, very, very important, and make sure the whole thing is sprayed with fixative, because if you don't do that, you put any paint on top of pencil or graphite or charcoal or whatever, and it'll just lift it off. So spray the whole thing with fixative. And then what I do is, you can see here where these darker tones are, that's where I've gone, like on the white canvas and the pencil, I've just gone with burnt umber and painted in some of these dark tones and darker midtones. It's a shame I don't have that to show you right now, but again, if you look at the videos, you'll be able to see it. And then once that's dry, then I go over the whole thing with a wash of burnt sienna. That's where you get this lovely kind of toned canvas, and you get rid of all of the white canvas at that point. And when you do that wash and kind of and smooth it all out, even it all out, you can wipe away where you want your highlights to be, and what you end up with is basically your dark tones, your midtones, and your highlights. So and that's the foundation that you need to move forward with the rest of your painting, with the painting detail. And that's how I work anyway. There are a lot of people that obviously work a la prima, and so they'll skip a lot of this kind of preparational work and just go right in and start, you know, painting shapes and all the rest of it. But for me, you know, I know a couple of people that can paint or draw a wild animal or any animal from memory and do it accurately, but that is incredibly unusual, and it's a skill that I would love to have and I don't have. I mean, I can do a fairly good job of it, but not to the extent I've seen some people do. So, you know, I like to be able to have everything kind of, you know, drawn out. I like to be able to make sure that my proportion is all correct, and all of that kind of stuff before I start rendering any kind of detail. Because you know, you can paint something a la prima, like those of you who do plein air landscapes. Obviously, you know, you don't have to worry too much about proportion and anatomy and all that kind of stuff. So it's much easier to sit down and paint a landscape without, you know, where you can get away with making little mistakes. But with wildlife, with animals, you know, I'm surrounded by people that are always looking at my paintings and making judgments about, you know, accuracy and all that kind of stuff. Well, at least I'm very conscious of that. Whether or not they are is another matter. But you know, when I look at wildlife paintings, I usually am making judgments about whether or not the person really understands the animal and the anatomy and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, for me, it's important. So mixing a palette. So I'm just gonna. So basically, the palette that I'm going to be mixing is. Usually what I do when I mix a palette is I mix a lot more colors than I would be using in the painting that I'm actually working on, because when I've mixed a palette, I do it on this paper palette, and I do it in these plastic boxes that have a rubber lid that when you put it on, it seals it, and then I put that in the freezer after I've done a day's work. And generally, when you do that, the lighter colors, the whites, the yellows, a lot of the browns, a lot of like Alizarin Crimson, burnt sienna, and all of those colors will last a really, really long time if you keep putting it in the freezer or the fridge or whatever in a sealed box overnight after you finish work. The darker colors like Prussian Blue and burnt Umber tend to dry very, very quickly. Like sometimes if they're not covered or sealed, they can dry overnight, which is a real pain. So I usually try and use as minimal amount of those as possible on a daily basis and just keep refreshing in the morning. And I can make a palette that I'm working with last for about 2 or 3 weeks. And so I can use that palette for multiple paintings sometimes, which is really useful. And that's why I love painting with oils. So I'm going to be working on this. So my reference is on my iPad here. And you can see, I don't know if you can see, let me just check. Yeah, you can kind of see that I've darkened the background just a little bit more than it is in the reference, because one of the real qualities of this image is this wonderful kind of halo effect that we're getting on the male line with the backlighting coming through. And there's also a lot of it around the lioness as well. And for me, you know, it's all very well like choosing a subject, like I'm going to paint a lion and a lioness. And if they're just like a lion just standing there, you know, to me, like it's great, you painted a lion, but what is interesting about that painting that sets it apart from everybody else's painting of a lion? So when I'm choosing a subject like this that's pretty straightforward, I want there to be something really interesting about it. And in this case, you know, we have this wonderful backlighting going on, and that's what I want to be like a major feature of the painting. And so, yeah, I always advise people when they're choosing subject matter to really, you know, think about, like, you know, you've been on safari, you've got a great picture of a lion or an elephant or whatever, and you're desperate to go home and paint it. Just always think beyond the fact that you've had this incredible encounter with an animal that not many people see. And think beyond that, and think about, you know, if people are going into a show and seeing that painting, like what is it that sets it apart from? Because a lot of people that look at my wildlife paintings have not had that encounter or experience, and it's very easy just to walk past a painting of something that everybody is familiar with, and not have your attention kind of grabbed. This is what my brain processes is sort of going through when I'm thinking about subject matter. So always, you know, I'll have a great, even leopards, you know, just painting a leopard just sitting there is not, for me, it's not enough. You know, there has to be something about the carriage of the leopard, the lighting, you know, or whether or not it's actually, you know, doing something, whether or not there's action happening in the painting. Because what I really don't want to happen is someone to walk past one of my paintings and go, oh, look, there's a lion just sitting there. Because that's what I do when, to be honest, you know, when I go to places where there are a lot of paintings of, say, like bears and moose and all the rest of it, you know, you don't want to go and visit like 3 or 4 galleries, each of which has probably 40 or 50 paintings of a moose, and just like every single one of them is like, oh, look, there's a moose just standing there. You know, you really want something to set it apart. So yeah, so this But also, you know, I want to do simple paintings that people can relate to as well. And an image like this is just very relatable. So it just has that little something in this case of, you know, with the javelina, I just really like this kind of pose where he's sort of marching into the wind and the grass is blowing. Obviously, this is, you know, a way out there kind of way of sort of making a painting more interesting. But hopefully, you know, it's something that will be relatable. So I'm just gonna like bring you guys in on how I mix a palette, and I'm hoping that I can zoom in. No, I still can't zoom in. Well, I think you guys can probably see well enough from there what I'm doing. So I'm just going to go ahead and do it. So always when I'm mixing a palette, hold on, I need to move that. I start out with my lightest and warmest colors first. So I get all my yellows out, and my oranges. Naples yellow. By the way, does anyone have any questions at all that would want to ask me at this point? Very good. I'm just assuming that's a no. Yeah, if people want to type out questions, I can answer those kind of later. So I'm starting out with Cadmium Lemon. So with Cadmium Lemon, when I'm painting the foreground of this painting, can you see the painting? Yeah, just kind of move that up so you can see the painting and the palette. Unfortunately, I can't include the reference image as well, unless maybe let's move this over to here. Can you guys all see that? Yeah, it's got reflection on it, unfortunately, but anyway, you kind of get the idea. So with Cadmium Lemon, this is what I would use mostly to mix very acidic greens, and because in this particular painting there aren't a lot of acidic greens. You have some quite acidic greens around the top of this kind of shrubbery here, and some in the grass in the foreground. So I'll definitely use a little bit of lemon, but it's not that much really. And then I'll go into the warmer yellows. So this is Cadmium Yellow Pale. And I put 2 or 3 splobs of it on the palette because I'll be mixing each one with different, like I'll mix one to make a green, I'll mix one to make a lighter brown, etc., etc. Mix it with my cadmium yellow. Always the most elusive. There we go. So cadmium yellow, I'll probably do quite a few because I mixed quite a lot of this with other colors. So about 5 of those. And remember as well, like it seems like very wasteful to squeeze this much paint out on a palette, but again, these will probably last me for about 3 weeks, and I'll be able to use them on multiple paintings. So I'm always thinking of that when I'm doing it. Bit of Naples yellow. So once you've like the main cadmiums that I use are Cadmium Lemon, Cadmium Yellow Pale, and Cadmium Yellow. I also use Cadmium Yellow Deep and Cadmium Orange, which I'll use around here, and I'll get to those in a bit. So once I've done those very bright sunshine yellows, I'll start going into the more kind of neutral yellows, like Naples yellow I use quite a lot of. So I'm going to do like 7 splobs of that. Do you like my technical term, splobs? And then yellow ochre pale, which is even more kind of earthy and neutral. I'm gonna mix some of that. Again, you know, these neutral yellows I'll use quite a lot in this painting. And I'll use them a lot in other paintings that I do. So quite a few splobs of it. Then kind of like down the middle, I'm thinking about the main colors that are mixed with these yellows and also with like darker browns. So I'm gonna start putting on like Alizarin Crimson down the middle here, and I'll do 3 or 4 of those. Alizarin Crimson is, so with the cadmium yellow, my dad always used to call this sunshine in the tube. And for obvious reasons, like if you're working on highlights and stuff like that, it just has this wonderful power. Alizarin Crimson is also a color that has incredible power to it, and the way it does is it works very well with warm highlights, but it also works really well in shadows. And if you really want a shadow to really be brought to life, use a bit of alizarin with your violets and your blues and all the rest of it, and those shadows will just come to life. It's just a really wonderful color for that. And so then burnt sienna, definitely doing wildlife subjects, and particularly African wildlife subjects. Burnt sienna is a very like broad common color that I use. The main compound of burnt sienna is iron oxide, and with iron oxide, so when you go to Africa and also Arizona here, and you see the very kind of rich, kind of bright terracotta color of the soil, that mainly is iron oxide. And in Kenya in particular, that can transfer to a lot of the animals as well. Like the elephants will go and roll in the mud, and so they get turned the same color. And so I'll use this quite a lot. And again, it's a great color because it doesn't dry too quickly, and I'll use it quite a fair bit, quite a few splobs of that, because I'll be mixing a lot of that with these. And then some of my oranges I'm going to put over this side, because I want to use these more to kind of mix with to make reds and browns, make those very bright. Oh dear, I'm running out of cadmium yellow deep. I have to order some of that. Yeah, unfortunately, cadmium is becoming incredibly expensive, as many of you will be no doubt aware of. And I mean, I think a lot of that is just the difficulty of sourcing it, but also a lot of companies are getting very nervous about the toxicity of paint, and it's fairly widely known that cadmium is supposed to have somewhat higher toxicity in terms of the fact that it's a radioactive element. But from everything that I've read, in order to get poisoning from cadmium, you would literally have to have it like coated all over your hands most of the time, and be putting it in your mouth quite a lot. And the way that I paint is pretty clean. I'm always wiping paint off my hands with baby wipes, and then washing my hands. I'm not a big, splatty kind of alla prima painter, so I'm always using brushes. So for that reason, I'm being less concerned about cadmium, being an issue, and hopefully it's going to be okay. I've done a lot of reading about it, and I'm not that concerned about it really. And you know, it's a shame that it's being treated as this kind of terrifying thing. So yellow ochre. So you see now I've gone from my lighter yellows around to some of the browns and the neutrals. Yellow ochre, I'm going to put some of that here. And oh, lovely. Out my raw umber. Open a new tube. So, so you have raw umber and burnt umber. Raw umber has a much kind of greener hue to it. Burnt umber is much warmer, kind of reddish brown. Just always be aware of that if you're using either of those. I use both on my palette. But yeah, just be aware of it when you're kind of choosing it to mix with other colors mainly. So again, because burnt umber dries quickly, I'm not going to put too much of that out, even though it's a color that I'll use, you know, a lot on my palette. I try and because if you mix burnt umber with a lighter color, that will make that color, that mixture will dry quicker as well, because you've used this paint. Finally, I've started using Ultramarine Violet quite a lot. So when I was mixing my violets before, I was always mixing a bit of alizarin with Prussian Blue and then a bit of white, and that can be quite time consuming and a bit tedious. And even though this is not similar to that mixture, I've started to find that it's a very useful color to have to kind of neutralize browns, to make them a little bit more gray. And so I actually now use it quite a lot. Like before, I used to only have 9 different colors that I would use, and I would always use a mixture of those 9 colors. And obviously, you know, as you go along, you try a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and now I'm up to about 12, I think. And then finally, Prussian Blue. So when you're doing very, very dark tones, obviously, you know, there's no black in nature, so you mix colors to make your blacks. And obviously, Prussian Blue is the darkest of all the blues that you can get into. But ironically, it's the blue that I most commonly use for my skies, because if you use a tiny bit of Prussian Blue with titanium white, you get a wonderful kind of color that is a lot more kind of reminiscent of sky color than any other blue that I use or have used, especially if you mix it with a tiny little bit of Alizarin Crimson, and you'll see that when I start mixing these colors. But also, yeah, you mix it with burnt umber, you basically get like a Payne's gray. So once I've got all the actual pigment colors down, I'll then go around the whole palette. And now you're probably thinking, why is he wasting so much paint? But actually, white also takes a very long time to dry. And so I can use quite a lot of it and not have to worry about wasting any. And the reason why I'm putting it all the way through like this is because I'm going to make mixtures of all these colors with these whites. So you've noticed that none of this is particularly scientific. It's a very organic kind of process that I use to make all of these mixtures. And every time it's slightly different, but every time I get a really nice broad range of colors that I use in my paintings. So yeah, looking okay. Okay, so then I just get a narrow hog's hair and I just kind of start going around the palette. So I want to keep some of these whites to use just straight white for my highlights. So I'll start here and mix a little bit of yellow with some of that white. And when I'm mixing it, I just kind of mix it together with the brush and then kind of go around the edge and then rotate the brush in the middle so that the bulk of the paint is in this little kind of nipple in the middle of the circle there. And then I'll move on to a warmer white. And when you mix these yellows with titanium white, it just for highlights, it makes them a lot more robust. Like if you're trying to use a straight yellow as a highlight somewhere that has a lot of, like, say, greens or browns, it's really hard to kind of get that to kind of jump out. Usually, if that's the case, and like with foliage, I'll just start. My first color that I'll put down will be like straight yellow, and I'll work around it with some of the neutrals and the greens. You going out? No, that's Andrew, by the way. Everyone say hi.
Hi.
Oh, he can't hear you. So yeah, I'm mixing some cadmium yellow pale with some of this cadmium lemon, just to get a sort of a sliding scale of different yellows. And then move on to straight cadmium yellow. Mix that with some white. And then mix some with cadmium yellow pale. Also, what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to start bringing in some burnt sienna and mixing that with some of these cadmiums. Get sort of these nice bright orangey browns. A bit of burnt umber as well to get a more neutral. So at the end of your kind of mixing session, what you're basically ending up with is, and very often, because I'm kind of going around organically like this, I generally don't wipe my brush off too much, but if I'm going from quite a dark mixture back to a lighter mixture, I'm just gonna wipe off the paint with a paper towel and get some of that. Mix that with white. And I love Naples yellow because it has this wonderful kind of buttery quality. So it's nice to use with these more robust yellows because it's a little bit more neutral. Definitely a color that you'll see in lion fur quite a lot, as well as yellow ochre. So mix some burnt sienna. And some burnt umber. And some raw umber. You see how how much greener raw umber is when you mix it with the yellow compared with the burnt umber. It really is quite a different hue. Very useful for natural foliage. And again, with the yellow ochre, mix a bit of white first. Very similar to the Naples yellow mixture. And then I'm going to mix some burnt sienna with that. And then burnt umber. And raw umber. Very, very similar Naples yellow and yellow ochre in terms of the colors that you get from it. I don't know why I use both, but it's just always nice to have slight variations to work with. So then from there, I'm still on my warms, and obviously there's no red in this painting, but I might use, some reds in my hummingbird painting at some point. So I'm going to mix a bit of Alizarin Crimson with my cadmium orange. And unless I'm doing something, a subject that has a specifically bright red color in it, I won't use anything other than this mixture for reds. I have used cadmium red on many occasions to mix color for certain animals where that's required, like a ground hornbill, needs cadmium red because of the color of the wattle. So yeah, birds are always a subject where you will probably need to go out and buy a new color to use. I'm just gonna, it's a kind of pink here. You never know when you might need some pink. And okay, so as I kind of move around now, I'm gonna mix some browns and whites. This is burnt sienna and titanium. Again, it looks very similar to this brown, but it has more of a sort of reddish pinkish quality to it when you take out the yellow component. And then burnt umber mixed, and we get a very neutral, comparatively kind of gray mix. And I'm going to take some of that and mix a little bit of alizarin with that. Get a sort of pinkish gray color. And that you'll see a lot of that in the lion's hide. Going to mix some burnt umber with this yellow ochre down here. And some raw umber. You can see I'm mixing quite a lot of this because I will actually use quite a lot of these browns in this painting. I'm going to mix some of that with white. So I've done most of my warmer tones. I'm gonna, I'll use some burnt sienna and alizarin together to make a very reddish, warm brown that I use quite a lot. And then I start to work on some of my cooler colors. So I'm going to mix some of this and add a tiny amount of Prussian blue. Prussian blue is such a strong color that you really just only need a tiny amount to. And we're getting into the realm of violets and sort of grayish cooler colors. Yeah. And okay, so now I'm going to mix straight alizarin. A little bit more actually. I want to a little darker than that. And some Prussian blue. Lovely violet color. And then I'll use some of this Ultramarine Violet. And you'll see it's quite similar, but the Ultramarine Violet definitely has a more icy kind of cooler quality to it. Very, very nice for shadows. Now I'm going to mix some of that with a bit of alizarin, just for a warmer violet. And I'm going to mix some of that with some burnt umber. So probably need a little bit more violet in there to get kind of a purpley brownish gray. And you'll see, come on. You can see me if you're crying out loud. You can see a lot of that color here. These cooler colors here are going to be what I'm using mostly in the bodies of the lions, and it's just going to be really lovely because they'll have this kind of contrast with some of these like warmer hues that I've got going on in there, where the sunlight's hitting the mane up there. And then finally, I'll just show you how you can get an amazing sky color just with that tiny amount of Prussian blue and mix it with white. And you get this wonderful kind of duck egg blue color. And you can mix that with varying degrees of like alizarin or anything else to get, different sky hues, because obviously, your skies can be multiple colors and clouds can be multiple colors. That's a whole nother workshop. So yeah, I mean, that very, very basically, that's what I end up with when I'm mixing a palette. Oh wait, I haven't done greens. Okay, so for my greens, so for my brightest, most acidic green, I'm just gonna literally like get one hair with Prussian blue on it and mix it with some of this cadmium yellow. This is cadmium lemon, and you get that wonderful kind of bright lime acidic kind of green color. And then a little bit with cadmium yellow pale, so slightly warmer green. And then a little bit more. Getting warmer on the scale with just using cadmium yellow. And then even warmer or more neutral with Naples yellow. And then finally, a really neutral green, yellow ochre, and Prussian blue mixed. So I've just used Prussian blue with all of these different kinds of yellows to get a kind of a sliding scale of greens that I would use. And I'll darken those with more blue or lighten them with more yellow. So actually, it's much harder to lighten the green once you've added a little bit of blue to it. So that's why you want to start off with like some really bright acidic greens that you're just going to use straight, and then work around them with some of these kind of more natural colors. So what time are we on? Oops. Okay, so that's where I'm going to wrap it up for today. Hold on a second. I'll just swing that around. Stephen, are you there? So thanks very much for watching. I hope that was so yeah, does anyone have any questions at all?
I have a random question about your hummingbird picture. I can't hear you. There you go.
Yeah.
Okay. When you use, I know we're going backwards here, but when you use the rubber cement with the acrylics in the background,
yeah,
do you use straight rubber cement or do you use like masking fluid?
I use straight rubber cement. It is the other day. I get this. I can't open the package now. I use Elmer's rubber cement.
Okay.
I'll just show you a bottle of it. And yeah, I mean, it comes with.
Okay, just tell me.
It comes with like a little like dipping brush in it. And sometimes if you want to do like very delicate stuff, you can just use the brush. You just have to be really careful and know like the consistency of it and how much of it's going to like, because quite often like a whole big blob of it will just kind of drop down and like you've used the entire bottle in like one big splat, basically. So, I mean, it's really fun.
Yeah.
And it can go horribly wrong, but it can also, it can produce these wonderful effects. So I just really enjoy it.
Yeah, it looks like you used a brush on some of those strokes. That's why I was wondering if it was masking fluid. Yeah.
For that one, I got a bottle about twice the size of that, and actually a lot more of it came out than I wanted to come out. And I didn't use a brush at all. I just like dripped it out. Just went like that, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to have fun doing it, right?
I know. It's I went to art college. My dad was always very envious of me going to art college. And he obviously spent a huge amount of money in order to support me going to art college. And so there was a kind of, a paternal concern mixed with a slight hint of resentment. Like when he would come and like look at my end of year show, and there's this thing on the ground that kind of looks like a dog's bowl with like strings like coming out of it and like all colors splattered all over it, and he's like, so You can
I'm
imagine
paying
what he
for
said.
this?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. What the F is that, basically?
yeah, yeah.
So anyway, but I enjoyed art college. I did learn a lot at art college. And then, I started painting a lot of very kind of traditional representational work for a long time. And then when I met Andrew, it was when he was just starting to really kind of experiment with, semi-abstract backgrounds and non-objective kind of stuff. And he was doing it for quite a while before I just kind of thought, well, I want to try and start doing some of that as well. So I get the very obvious thing of, like, every time I do one of these paintings, hey, I can see the influence of Andrew in that painting, and that's that's normal, I think.
It's not so bad though. He does beautiful
No,
work.
it doesn't bother me at all. But I mean, I wish there was some way that people would be more aware of how much, like, this kind of work I was doing before I was doing any of the other kind of work. It was very foundational to me doing a lot of my representational work. So yeah. And when you're doing an abstract thing with a painting, whether it be a background or a foreground or a subject or whatever, a lot of it is important to have fun with it and to be spontaneous with it. But at the same time, it's obviously got to end up being something that looks like it's considered and thought out and all the rest of it. I mean, otherwise, you're just doing, Jackson Pollock, basically, which obviously, everyone thinks is a very important part of the movement of modern art. So
That makes sense.
I have a question about your palette.
mm-hmm.
You usually are doing such large works.
Yes.
And how do you make those tiny little dots spread out so far?
Well,
Are you adding some kind of liquid or something to make it go further?
No. So the only time I ever use liquid is for doing a wash when I'm doing, like, my underpainting.
Okay.
So this burnt sienna underpainting was just a mix of liquid, or just to dilute the burnt umber when I'm doing the darker tones. When I'm doing my final rendering, I do not use any medium whatsoever. And the reason for that is because when I'm doing, like, fine detail, what I want is for my brush to pick up the paint. So I'll just, a little example of it. So when I'm loading my brush, I kind of do it in a crisscross motion. And when it's loaded, what I end up is like a blade. You see that?
Yes.
And if you mix any kind of medium with the paint, that's not going to happen, because what the medium does is it just loosens the paint, and then it doesn't bind the bristles of the brush together. So when you're using straight paint, and I always use Winsor & Newton artist oil, when you're using straight paint on the brush, it binds the bristles together, and you can actually sculpt it into a tool in order to kind of use it for strokes, so you can get, like, fine detail with it. So,
Thank you.
So yeah, the only times I ever use liquid is for my underpainting. And also when I finish the painting, quite often what you get with oil paintings is a lot of the paint dries with a different sheen. So the darker colors will dry with a more shiny kind of sheen to it, as opposed to, like, the lighter colors, which can be more matte. And in order to kind of consolidate those differences in the sheen, I'll do just a kind of layer of liquid over the whole painting. But that's only when it's completely dry. They even say on the liquid, do not do that until, like, something ridiculous, like 6 months after, you've applied the paint, which I don't do that. Like, I'll do it like maybe 10 days after it. But what it does is it just consolidates those differences in sheen, so you get more of an even surface. It's a little bit shiny, so it can make the colors actually more kind of saturated.
Thank you.
Sure.
Do you apply your liquid on the finished painting with a brush?
No. Well, yeah, sometimes I do. Sometimes I'll just use a paper towel.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm feeling like I'm in a rush, or if I'm really confident that the paint is completely dry, I'll just use a paper towel. But I've done that before, and the paint hasn't been completely dry, and I've ended up with some paint kind of being lifted off. So yeah, just be really, really careful and make sure that any of the paint is like absolutely 100% dry before you do that. And even with a brush, you're gonna, if it's not dry, you're gonna lift some of the paint off. So either way, you know, it's just the way. And even if I've applied it with a brush, quite often what I'll do is I'll even it out with a paper towel just to make sure that it has a completely even sheen.
Thank you.
Sure.
Do you varnish after that?
No, I never varnish my paintings. That is something that Dad kind of struggled with. I always remember at one point, I think he bought some varnish in Nairobi that was recommended to him, and it was not good. And he covered the painting in it, and within about a month, it was like bright yellow or something. And so and so from then on, he was very wary of varnishes, and he did a lot of research, and basically, you know, the new kinds of paints that you get, the Winsor & Newtons and all of these new kinds of paints, their compounds and their consistency are such that you don't really need to use varnish. They're not like, you know, the older style paints that fade and chip off and all that kind of stuff. You know, they're very robust and they're flexible. So for me, like, because I use a very thin layer of paint, I've been told that it's not absolutely necessary to use varnish, so I don't. I'll just do a sheen of liquid and then be done with it, basically.
I have one more question about your palette, and if you, how do you keep it for 3 weeks? Do you cover it? Do you put it in the freezer?
So yeah, so I have, so you can see the palette there. Oh, sorry, I just knocked the thing. So this is it's like a rubber lid, and you can see it has like a lip on it. So when you put it on, it completely seals it. And then we've got a chest freezer here in the studio, and I put it in the freezer overnight. And when I take it out, within 10 minutes, it's defrosted and ready to use. And because it's sealed in, you don't get any water kind of condensation on the paint. So yeah, I mean, it works for me. And like I said before, like all of these lighter colors. So all of these colors here, and even these as well, all of these will last, yeah, like three weeks, sometimes even 4 weeks. I've made a palette last. But these darker colors, these will dry very quickly. So these may be dry in maybe 3 or 4 days, even when I'm putting it in the freezer. So I try and use as much of these as I can before, like, just scraping it off. And so I'll be constantly scraping off where the darker colors are, but these lighter areas always will last for quite a long time. So
Thank you.
yeah. Any more questions?
I have a question.
Yep.
Instead of using the palette paper, have you ever used glass on in your palette boxes?
I haven't used glass. I used to always have a wooden palette, but I started using the paper because you can still scrape paint off the paper palette, but it's just become very easy. Like when my palette gets quite messy, and some of the colors are all kind of starting to, you know, bleed into each other and all the rest of it, I can just take a piece of paper off and then scrape off where the colors are still, you know, good, and then put them onto a new piece of paper and then keep it going that way. Otherwise, you know, you just kind of end up with like quite a messy palette. If you're using a wood palette, I find that I waste a lot more paint with a wood palette than I do using these paper palettes. So I prefer them.
Okay.
So yeah,
Thanks.
sure. Anyone else have questions? Well, cool. Well, I'm going to wrap it up then. Thank you everyone for watching. You can follow me on Facebook and Instagram. Yeah, I'll read. Thanks, Judy. I'll read all the messages after this. If you want to message me or have any questions you want to message me, please do. And please do tune in when we do the SKB Mega Zoom in September, when all of these big names will be, I'll be somewhere down the list after Bateman and Banovich and all that lot.
Not far down.
Well, thanks.
Thank you so much. This was really informative about the mixing of the color. So thank you.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you so much, Guy.
Thank
Thanks.
you, guys.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay,
Cheers.
I'm gonna. Yeah, I'm gonna sign off now.
Okay, thanks, Guy. Have a great day.
Bye.
Yeah, you
Thank
too.
you.
Bye. Bye.